Understanding non-self. Why letting go leads to true inner peace. The Buddha once said, "All phenomena are without a self." When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. This is the path to purification. Understanding the truth of anatta, the absence of a permanent self, is a cornerstone of Buddhist practice and wisdom. It challenges our deeply ingrained attachment to identity, ego, and possessions, which are the root causes of suffering. By deeply contemplating and embodying this teaching, we can free ourselves from the cycles of clinging and aversion, ultimately finding a profound sense of inner peace and liberation. The concept of non-self, Pali anatta, is one of the core teachings of Buddhism. At first, it may seem difficult to understand because it challenges something we often take for granted: the idea of me or mine. Most people naturally believe there is a fixed, permanent self that defines who they are. We might think of this self as a combination of our body, mind, emotions, and memories. But according to the Buddha, this belief in a solid, unchanging self is a misunderstanding, and it's one of the main causes of human suffering. Buddhism teaches that everything in life, including what we call self, is marked by three fundamental characteristics: impermanence, anicca, suffering, dukkha, and non-self, anatta. Impermanence reminds us that everything is constantly changing: our thoughts, our relationships, our bodies, even the world around us. Suffering arises because we resist these changes and cling to things as if they could stay the same. And at the heart of this clinging is the illusion of self. The Buddha taught, "All phenomena are without self." When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. This is the path to purification. This teaching invites us to let go of the belief in a fixed self and instead see life as a dynamic flow of experiences. But why does this matter? In today's world, people are often consumed by the need to define who they are. We attach our identity to our jobs, relationships, possessions, and even our social media profiles. When something threatens these attachments, like losing a job, facing criticism, or experiencing a breakup, we feel lost and unhappy. The Buddha's teaching on non-self shows us a different way to live. By understanding that there is no permanent I to protect or hold on to, we can find true freedom and inner peace. What exactly is this self that we cling to so tightly? From the Buddhist perspective, the self is a mental construct, a story we tell ourselves to make sense of our experiences. This story is built on what the Buddha called the five aggregates, khandhas: form, our physical body; feeling, sensations; perception, our recognition of things; mental formations, thoughts, emotions, habits; and consciousness, awareness itself. When we examine these aggregates closely, we see that none of them are permanent or truly ours. For example, our bodies change constantly, from birth to aging to death. Our feelings come and go, as do our thoughts and moods. Yet we cling to these fleeting experiences as if they were part of a solid me. The Buddha explained this beautifully in the Anatta Lakkhana Sutta, the discourse on the characteristic of non-self. Body, feelings, perceptions, mental formations, and consciousness are not self. If they were self, they would not lead to affliction. One could say of the body, "Let my body be like this. Let my body not be like that." But because they are not self, they lead to affliction, and one cannot have it as one wishes. This teaching shows us that clinging to the aggregates only brings suffering, because they are beyond our control. Interestingly, This idea of the self as an illusion is not unique to Buddhism. In Western psychology, there's a growing understanding that our sense of identity is shaped by our environment, upbringing, and culture. Similarly, philosophers like David Hume have argued that the self is nothing more than a collection of perceptions that arise and fade away. However, what makes Buddhism unique is its practical approach to freeing ourselves from this illusion through mindfulness and meditation. One common misunderstanding is that Buddhism denies the existence of experience altogether. This is not true. The Buddha didn't say there is no experience. He simply pointed out that there is no unchanging self behind the experience. In the same way, a river exists, but it is not the same water flowing through it at any moment. The river is a process, not a fixed entity, and so are we. When we cling to the idea of I and mine, we create endless problems. Think about how many arguments arise from the need to defend our opinions or possessions. How much stress do we feel trying to prove ourselves to others? The illusion of self traps us in a cycle of fear, pride, and comparison. By seeing through this illusion, we can break free and live with greater ease. One of the biggest challenges in understanding non-self is avoiding the trap of nihilism, the belief that nothing matters and life has no meaning. Some people hear the teaching of non-self and think it means they should reject everything or stop caring about life. But this is a misunderstanding. Non-self is not about denying reality. It's about seeing reality clearly. The Buddha said, "By clinging to self, one only multiplies suffering. By letting go, one discovers true joy." This joy comes from understanding that life is a flow, not a fixed object. Just as a wave is part of the ocean, we are part of the interconnected web of life. Recognizing this doesn't diminish our value, it expands it. When we stop obsessing over our personal identity, we become more open to others and to the present moment. In daily life, we can see the teaching of non-self at work in simple ways. For example, think about how your emotions change throughout the day. In the morning, you might feel confident, but by afternoon, you're anxious about a task. Are these emotions you? If they were, you wouldn't be able to let them go. Or consider how our roles change. One moment, you're a friend, the next a parent, a colleague, or a student. None of these roles define you permanently. They're just temporary expressions of who you are in that moment. Understanding non-self can also help us navigate relationships. When we stop seeing people as fixed identities, "He's always selfish," "She's just difficult," we open up to the possibility of change and growth. We can respond to others with more patience and kindness, because we understand they too are shaped by their circumstances and experiences. The teaching of non-self doesn't ask us to abandon life. It invites us to embrace it fully, without clinging. It's like holding water in your hands. If you grip too tightly, it slips away. But if you hold it gently, it stays. By letting go of the illusion of self, we stop grasping and start living with true freedom. In meditation, we can experience this directly. When we observe our thoughts and sensations without labeling them as mine, we begin to see their impermanent, impersonal nature. This doesn't make life less meaningful. It makes it more vibrant. As the Buddha said, in seeing things as they are, one becomes free from the fetters of ignorance. This freedom is the heart of the path to peace. The Buddha taught that the path to understanding non-self is not merely intellectual. It requires direct experience. Meditation, particularly insight meditation, vipassana, is a powerful tool for uncovering the truth of non-self in our daily lives. Through careful observation of our thoughts, feelings, and sensations, we begin to see how impermanent and impersonal they really are. One foundational practice in vipassana is observing the breath. As we focus on the inhale and exhale, we notice how each breath arises and fades away naturally. The breath is not something we control. It happens on its own. This simple practice is a gateway to understanding impermanence and the lack of a fixed self. The Buddha said, "Just as a monkey swinging through the forest grabs one branch and lets it go to seize another, so too, that which we call consciousness arises and ceases continuously." Another method involves observing sensations in the body. By scanning the body from head to toe, we notice how sensations, such as warmth, tingling, or tension, appear and disappear. These sensations are not ours. They are simply processes unfolding. This practice helps us loosen our attachment to the body as me or mine. A deeper meditative technique focuses on analyzing the 5 aggregates, the building blocks of what we perceive as self. For instance, if we examine the aggregate of form, our body, we see that it is made up of elements like bones, muscles, and skin, all of which are subject to decay. Similarly, when we look at feelings or perceptions, we notice they constantly change. By breaking down these aggregates through contemplation, we begin to realize there is no permanent controller or I behind them. This understanding can feel unsettling at first. But as we continue to meditate, it becomes liberating. Without a fixed self to defend or protect, we experience life with greater ease and openness. The Buddha encouraged this practice, saying, "Meditate. Do not delay, lest you later regret it. Those who meditate with diligence will reach liberation." One of the most profound realizations on the Buddhist path is that letting go of the illusion of self leads to true peace. When we stop clinging to the idea of I and mine, we free ourselves from unnecessary struggles. The Buddha described this state as nibbana, a liberation from suffering and the cycle of attachment. Think about how much stress comes from trying to define ourselves. We constantly worry about how others perceive us, whether we're successful enough or if we're meeting certain expectations. These pressures stem from the illusion of self. But when we see that there is no fixed self to maintain, these worries start to dissolve. As the Buddha said, "Clinging to what is not yours brings sorrow. Letting go brings joy." Living without the burden of self-centered thinking also transforms our relationships. Without the need to protect an ego, we can approach others with greater compassion and understanding. For example, if someone criticizes us, we don't have to take it personally. Instead, we can see their words as a reflection of their own experiences and emotions, not as an attack on us. Letting go doesn't mean we stop caring about life. It means we stop clinging to it. Imagine holding a bird in your hands. If you grasp it tightly, you harm the bird and yourself. But if you hold it gently, both of you are free. The same principle applies to our sense of self. By releasing our grip, we allow life to flow naturally, without unnecessary tension. The ultimate liberation, as taught by the Buddha, comes from fully realizing non-self. This realization is not an abstract concept. It is a lived experience. It is the freedom from clinging to anything as I or mine. The Buddha said, "There is no fire like passion, no chain like hatred, no net like delusion. To overcome these is to find peace. Peace arises when we let go of the causes of suffering and live with an open heart." Understanding non-self is not just a philosophical exercise, it's a practical guide for living. In our modern world, this wisdom can help us navigate relationships, work, and even creativity with greater balance and freedom. Take relationships, for example. Many conflicts arise from possessiveness or expectations. We think, this person should act a certain way because they are my partner, friend, or family member. But when we let go of these rigid ideas, we create space for genuine connection. The Buddha taught, to love without clinging is to love truly. By seeing others as ever-changing beings, just like ourselves, we can relate to them with more kindness and patience. At work, understanding non-self can help us let go of perfectionism and fear of failure. When we stop tying our identity to our achievements, we free ourselves to focus on the process rather than the outcome. This shift not only reduces stress, but also enhances creativity. Without the pressure of proving ourselves, we can approach tasks with curiosity and joy. Even our view of success changes when we embrace non-self. Instead of chasing status or material wealth, we find fulfillment in the present moment. We see that happiness doesn't come from accumulating possessions or accolades. It comes from letting go of the need to be something or someone. Applying non-self in daily life also makes us more resilient. When we face challenges or setbacks, we understand they don't define us. Like waves on the ocean, difficulties arise and pass away. By staying grounded in this understanding, we can face life's ups and downs with equanimity. The Buddha's wisdom offers us a timeless reminder. Just as the ocean does not overflow with incoming rivers, so the wise remain steady in the face of praise or blame, gain or loss, joy or sorrow. This steadiness comes from seeing through the illusion of self and living with greater freedom and peace. The journey to understanding non-self is not without challenges. It's natural to feel resistance or confusion when faced with teachings that question the very foundation of how we perceive ourselves. The Buddha understood this and often spoke to his followers about the common difficulties on the path. One of the biggest challenges is the fear of losing identity. Many people worry, if there's no self, then who am I? Does life even have meaning? This fear stems from deeply ingrained habits of identifying with the I and mine. But the Buddha reassured us that letting go of self does not lead to emptiness or meaninglessness. On the contrary, it leads to greater clarity and freedom. He said, "The wise person, having abandoned identity, transcends fear. Free from self, they find peace." To navigate this fear, it's helpful to approach the teaching of non-self gradually. Instead of trying to fully grasp it all at once, we can begin by observing small moments in daily life. For example, notice how emotions like anger or sadness arise and pass away. They feel overwhelming in the moment, but they don't last forever. Realizing this impermanence can help us loosen our attachment to them as part of who we are. Another common challenge is balancing spiritual insights with practical responsibilities. In our daily lives, we still need to make decisions, take care of loved ones, and fulfill obligations. Understanding non-self doesn't mean abandoning these roles. It means approaching them with less attachment. The Buddha taught, even as one works in the world, let them live with mindfulness and understanding, unshaken by the tides of change. For example, you can fulfill your role as a parent, friend, or professional without clinging to it as your identity. See these roles as temporary and fluid, like clothes you wear for a specific occasion. When the occasion changes, you can let go without resistance. This flexibility allows you to respond to life's demands with more wisdom and compassion. Finally, it's important to recognize that progress on this path takes time. Doubts and difficulties are natural, and they can even be signs of growth. The Buddha encouraged patience, saying, "As a farmer waits for the right season to harvest, so too must one cultivate wisdom with care and perseverance." The teaching of non-self is not just a personal practice, it has profound implications for how we relate to the world. At its core, non-self challenges the divisive boundaries we create between self and other, us and them. By understanding that there is no fixed self, we begin to see all beings as interconnected. One area where this understanding is especially transformative is in overcoming divisive identities like nationality, race, or religion. These labels often create separation and conflict, but they are ultimately based on the illusion of self. The Buddha said, "In the seen, there is only the seen, in the heard, only the heard." When one sees without attachment, they go beyond the dualities of I and you. This doesn't mean we ignore cultural or individual differences. Instead, it means we stop clinging to them as absolute. We recognize that all beings share the same fundamental experiences of seeking happiness and avoiding suffering. This shared humanity becomes the basis for compassion and ethical living. For example, when we understand non-self, we are less likely to judge others based on superficial identities. We can approach people with openness and curiosity, seeing them as dynamic and ever-changing, just like ourselves. This perspective fosters greater empathy and reduces conflict. The teaching of non-self also inspires a commitment to social and environmental causes. When we see that we are not separate from the world around us, we feel a natural responsibility to care for it. The Buddha taught, as a mother protects her only child, so with a boundless heart one should cherish all living beings. By letting go of ego-driven desires, we can act with greater compassion and wisdom for the benefit of all. Imagine a world where people no longer cling to the illusion of self. There would be less greed, less hatred, and less fear. Instead, there would be a shared sense of belonging and purpose. This is the vision the Buddha offered, a world where understanding non-self becomes the foundation for harmony and peace. The journey to understanding non-self is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing process. The Buddha often described this path as one of continuous mindfulness, inquiry, and letting go. He said, "Just as the ocean has a single taste, that of salt, so too does my teaching have a single taste, the taste of liberation." Understanding non-self is not about rejecting life. It's about living it more fully. When we see through the illusion of self, we stop clinging to what cannot be held, and we begin to embrace the present moment with greater clarity and ease. Suffering diminishes because we are no longer caught in the endless cycle of defending or proving ourselves. Instead, we live with a sense of freedom and openness. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It requires practice, patience, and a willingness to face our fears. But with each step, we come closer to the peace that the Buddha spoke of, the peace that comes from seeing things as they truly are. He said, "By letting go, one becomes free. By understanding, one finds peace. And by living with wisdom, one crosses the ocean of suffering." As we reflect on this teaching, it's helpful to remember that the path is unique for each of us. Some may find insight through meditation, others through study, and still others through acts of compassion. What matters is not how we walk the path, but that we continue to walk it with sincerity and an open heart. In conclusion, the teaching of non-self is not just a philosophical idea. It is a living truth that can transform our lives and our world. It invites us to let go of the illusions that bind us and to embrace the freedom that comes from understanding our interconnectedness. This freedom is the key to inner peace, and it is available to anyone willing to seek it. The Buddha's parting words to his disciples were simple, yet profound. "Be a lamp unto yourselves. Work diligently for your liberation." These words remind us that the journey to understanding non-self is ultimately our own. It is a path of discovery, courage, and awakening, a path that leads to true peace and happiness.